hello everybody. I'm Tony Temple again. I'm sorry. Very kind, really. Thanks. We're here for the Mortal Kombat Mortal Kombat panel. So I've got a slight.
The little-known Mortal Kombat camel. There's a story there.
You can have that for free, Warren. So I've got a bit of a confession to make. I have to say that Mortal Kombat kind of passed me by. I was of a certain age. I was starting work. I was wearing suits, trying to find a career. So when I was asked to do the Mortal Kombat panel, I got really excited actually, because this is it's obviously a game I'm aware of, but it isn't something that I've ever kind of dug deeply into. So from a old school classic arcade gamer, I am very much looking forward to this. As you guys have probably worked out, we have two people with us. We have Warren Davis. Gentlemen. And of course, Daniel Pesina. I'm at all of 10 minutes on PowerPoint. That took me. You see, it even says free play on the bottom. Right? So Mortal Kombat. One of the stats that I was amazed at is Mortal Kombat, according to Wikipedia. Who knows, but they estimate that the franchise is worth $1.8 billion. I mean, whoever would have thought, hey? I mean, who said video games were dead in the early 90s, right?
Yeah, I was going
Yeah.
to say. We're not seeing any of that 1.8 billion, either of us.
Right, yeah, okay. So to start talking about Mortal Kombat, I think we need to go back a few years if we can. And Warren, I think we're going to turn to you first. WTARG, can you tell us what WTARG is, or is it WTARG?
It is WTARG,
okay.
yes. Just not that anybody would know that, because it could just as easily be WTARG, but WTARG sounding more like a Star Wars character or something, yeah.
Or from Harry Potter.
But I think that would be W''targ, WTARG. Anyway, but it is WTARG. WTARG is what I called the software I created to do video digitizing in the late 1980s. I started at Williams in 1986. I think it was 1986, and the video department at that time was completely decimated. The crash of '84, just made the arcade industry. Thinned the arcade industry out. Williams stayed in it, but they had sort of like a skeleton crew making video games, and I kind of was hired as they sort of sensed, I think, that the arcade industry was sort of coming back and recovering. So they were investing in more people. And I came in the middle of the development of Joust 2 and helped to complete that project when the original programmer was fired. But after that, after Joust 2 was out the door, we started looking at making a new system, a new hardware system, because the Joust hardware was the older kind with the 16 colors, and the future was that memory was cheaper, CPUs were faster, and we were all saying the next step is 256 colors. So having a palette of 256 colors available for a game meant that you could do more things that might be a little more photorealistic. And around this time, Amiga, the Amiga computer was out, and somebody was making a video digitizer for the Amiga, which meant you could point a video camera at something, some live subject, and you would get a digital video image of that subject. It was very clunky, it was slow, they were still images, but what I saw was the potential, as the memory got faster and cheaper, as the processors got faster, we would be able to grab frames from a live video source and digitize them, and that's where I felt it was going to go. And I was right. It just took years. But at that point, I started making this software. Not this software. WTARG came later, because WTARG it took a couple of years. The Amiga obviously was good for experimentation, but it was not good for our practical purposes. But then the Targa board came out, which had video digitization, was a little faster, and it had a software development kit. What that means, it had hooks or ways that I could basically write my own software to hook into their hardware to make that board do what I wanted it to do. And so I wrote this WTARG. And as we got the system that we were working on got scrapped. Eugene Jarvis came back to Williams. He was not there when I started. But he came back and he threw out the plans for our 256 color system and said, no, I want to do this. So we went a different direction, but we eventually developed a 256 color system, and I wrote the display system, Eugene wrote the operating system, and then we both separated and started working on different games. And Eugene, Jack Hager, George Petro worked on NARC, what would become NARC. I was paired with John Newcomer, and we were working on a game based on the old tank game with digitized graphics called USSA. USSA was canceled. NARC was not. NARC was released. And here's NARC as the first game to use digitized graphics. And that, by the way, that the bad guy in the trench coat is Mark Lafredo, our hardware designer. He's the guy who designed our video hardware. Many of the employees of Williams became characters in the games, including that's part of it. But even in Mortal Kombat, like Sal DeVita, who was one of the artists, was one of the characters or a couple of the characters. Anyway, all right, I'm done talking.
Warren, how when NARC is the first game to have used this system, can you talk a bit as to how primitive NARC is now you're looking back at it today?
Sure.
Because this looks a million miles away from what was Mortal Kombat.
Oh, yeah. And there's an interesting reason for that. So in the original version of WTARG, again, it was very slow. We could not grab frames in real time. So what we had to do is we had to videotape whatever action we wanted, and then we would have to pause the videotape and grab a single frame, and then strip out the background until only the subject, the character, was left. That was a very laborious process. That was a terribly horrible, laborious process. And because we only had a total palette of 256 colors, we had to do a lot of palette management. So how many characters could this character get? How many colors could this character get? And that you can see that in the game. So that's what sort of the limitations. The other thing is, it was our first digitized game, and the artists tended to clean up the digitized images. So they didn't really look that digitized. Like Lafredo looks pretty digitized, but the actual player himself, he was cleaned up so much. He really doesn't look like he was digitized. So it was a combination of just, again, the clunkiness of the original system and the limitations of it and what the artists did. So NARC, really doesn't have that digitized look like other games. But, things like this, And again, very much artist cleaned up.
And then you left Williams, Warren.
Yeah, so what happened is, I left Williams. USSA, the game I'd been working on, was canceled. They basically wanted me to work on a football game, but I had no interest in that. So I left Williams, and things moved on without me. I went on to make a game called Exterminator for Premier Technology, also using digitization technology. But I was actually called back to Williams in 1991 because a programmer had left in the middle of the development of Terminator 2, and they needed somebody to fill in. So I was back at Williams. I was happy to be back. The timing was great, and I came back, started working on Terminator 2. What I was horrified to see was that no one had sort of picked up the mantle and taken advantage of the improvements in the last 3 years and upgraded WTARG. They were using the same old system, the same old methods. Now, maybe they had gotten a little bit better at it and they had cleaned things up, but generally they were doing the same old stuff. And I was stunned, and I said, all right, well, I'm going to take it upon myself to continue to develop it. And so then it started, coming to its own.
And so is this an improved version of WTARG compared to, or is it fundamentally the same system?
I think for T2 is essentially the same system. I think the artists got better at using it,
Okay.
and the artists sort of got familiar with what it should look like. It's possible Because at some point we started to increase the number of pallets that we had available. And that tremendously helped the look of the game. So I'm not sure exactly if the hardware was improved to give us that much. But yeah, that would made a big difference.
Great.
Mortal Kombat 1, the first Mortal Kombat, was using the original W-Targ.
Okay, interesting. And so, Daniel, sorry, thanks for your patience there, Daniel. So, Daniel, whilst all
Interesting stuff, right?
right, well, so whilst all this stuff was going on behind closed doors in Chicago, what was Daniel Pesina doing during this time, 86, 87, 88?
Training in martial arts.
Okay.
Yeah, I trained in mainland China. The doors opened in mainland China in I think it was 84, where it was before, with the what they call it, the wall. No foreigners could go into China, mainland China. So they opened up, and it was a chance to study martial arts in a place where time hasn't really changed. Like outside of mainland China, martial arts turned more towards sport, while in mainland China they practice it like in a more traditional way. So at that time, I got the opportunity in 1986 to train in China for 3 months.
Great. Okay. So bringing us up to the conception of Mortal Kombat. So as I understand it, you received a phone call from a friend of yours.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, my brother is who we see right there is my brother Raiden. Got heavily into art, to drawing, and him and a couple friends would come over to my parents' home or to their homes to draw art together. So one of those guys was John Tobias, and later on when he was attending college, he had this bright idea he wanted to be a director. And so he got us together with a high camera, and we tried to film kung fu movies. Like me and my brother and Rich DeVizio, the guy who played Kano, would be like doing kung fu movies against each other, and he would be recording them with a high camera that his dad owned. So later on, I received a phone call, and he was like, "Hey, remember that? Remember when we used to shoot those movies?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was kind of cool." And he's like, "I work for a game company, and I have an idea for a game. Will you help me? Will you help me? I want it to be live action. Will you come into the studio and film some moves, and then I'm going to draw some sketches, and I'm going to take this to, my bosses at Midway." And so basically, on a late night, because again, he's like, "Oh, I want to protect my ideas," which he told me. "Can you come to my job like late at night, like 10 o'clock at night?" And I was like, "Sure," and basically we snuck into Midway. We cleaned out a storage area, what I thought was a storage area, which was really, they used as a film studio, but there were desks and chairs and lamps in there. And we found a place, and we put together some fight sets. And so they took that, and then John's drawings, and approached someone at the Midway Games with that.
Okay. And in my reading, what's this guy got to do with the story? So this is Mr. Van Damme, right? How is he related to?
Yeah, at the time, as what I was told was when John began to spread his idea of the game, a different idea came up to have a mainstream fighting game, not this fantasy game, because they thought it wouldn't sell too much, to have Jean-Claude Van Damme star in a fighting game, which really at that time was 2 different projects. But I know a lot of people mix it up, and it's 25 years ago. But at that time, I was kind of sad about that, because I had some ideas that I gave John about the game, and then I was like, crap, they're going to give those ideas to Jean-Claude Van Damme. Originally I was heavily into Chinese martial arts from training in China, and one of the legends was the Lin Kuei. And I was like, "John, if we do this video game, you have to change the Japanese ninjas into Chinese Lin Kuei ninjas, and you try to use the Lin Kuei legend." So, I showed him the book that he could pull references and stuff like that. So that was part of it. and then they were going to give it to this guy, Jean-Claude Van Damme, who I'm a fan of. I pay for his movies. I still pay for his movies. So I'm a big fan, and then they decided, like at that time, they were going to go with a game with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and our original version of what would later on be called Mortal Kombat was canceled.
But that all fell through.
Thank God.
Of course, yeah. Otherwise we wouldn't.
Kinda.
Otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here, would we? So you mentioned the process of going to literally a warehouse. You cleared out a storage area, set up. This is what I assume is the WTARG system, right? Or part of it, right?
Yeah, well, the WTARG system is software and hardware. It's basically a Targa board in a PC with a video camera connected to it running my software. That's what WTARG was. And the thing that WTARG would do is it would allow, it would grab, the original one would grab, individual frames and then let you sort of string together the frames you wanted, play them backwards, forwards. Obviously, we can talk later about how it evolved for Mortal Kombat 2 and 3, but at the very beginning, yeah, they had to videotape and then, like I said, freeze frame every frame that they wanted, strip it out manually. It was very clunky. It was very difficult. But I remember the first time Ed Boon or John Tobias came up to me to tell me how they were using it, and I thought, this is genius. This is the way I intended for this software to be used, like a lot of the other game. And we were working on Terminator 2. Terminator 2 wasn't out the door yet. But I just thought these guys, because the characters were much larger, so the large characters let you see more detail. If you try to get down to that, 32 pixel size or something, you lose a lot of detail. Anyway, I just thought they did a great job of using WTARG for it.
And Daniel, the process we see here, from what I read, it was pretty grueling, hardcore, long hours. Can you elaborate on the actual process of being there and doing this stuff?
Yeah. So what you saw at the beginning of this actually was the first fatality ever created. Well, like John was like, hey, we need to have some way to finish an opponent. So I thought that it would be cool if I jumped up in the air and I put my fist through somebody's skull, and then he looks at the camera and he's got a hole in his skull. So we filmed it, but then in the end, John thought it was too violent. So at that time, but apparently they use it. One character, I don't know who used it, but they use it now for a character. But at the beginning,
and I'm right in saying, we're kind of jumping ahead slightly, but I'm right in saying that they didn't use that as your fatality. So what Tobias said to you was, well, why don't you do the splits? Then you can just punch people in the balls. Right?
Well, they thought that was,
That's just like that's the best quote ever.
Yeah, but an example is like this video you're watching is about maybe 50 hours into filming. The original stuff we taped over because we didn't have a budget. So I recall the first day filming, filmed 8 or 10 hours. John put me in front of a wall, and we just recorded movement like the whole day with no direction. So I just did martial art move after martial art move after martial art move. We took a look at the video, and he's like, okay, tomorrow we're going to organize it. We need to have high, medium, and low. So we came in the next day. We organized it more. He looked at it, and he said, guess what? You can't be moving around a lot when you do it. And I was like, okay, we got to mark the floor. So at the beginning, I put little stirrups in the place, little squares in the place. And then we did the filming, and then after close to the end of that day, John was like, well, sometimes the shade of your face, because the lighting was limited, was different. So then I squared off a place. I was like, okay. So he looked at through the camera, and then he would be like, I would inch forward, and he'd be like, right there. So we marked the floor there, and then inch backward, and right there. And so we made a little box. And so we filmed the day, and the next day when we came in, somebody removed the tape for that stuff and where the camera would go. So then we had to start again from the whole beginning. So we had about 5 or 6 days of 8 to 10 hour days, even before we finally got something that we're like, okay, come on, let's try to get a programmer in here and try to figure out how to actually use the movement using the hitboxes. So yeah, it was, and two, I did jumping on concrete at the beginning. I did falls on the concrete at the beginning. Later on, John told me, "Oh, we have a mat, but you look comfortable," because I did judo for a long time, And so you look comfortable falling on the concrete. So it was, it was a long process. It was a little grueling.
And in terms of, and forgive me for not being a martial artist of any description at all, but how authentic are the moves that we see in Mortal Kombat, or rather, how relatable are the bulk of the moves within Mortal Kombat to what one would consider as authentic martial arts?
Yeah, in the first game, we really tried to pay attention to. We did it slow, and we made sure that each character had something would kick a little bit different than the next character. So we tried to make have like a complete personality, even though we didn't have names for the characters. We just started saying, "Oh, this guy is this," and we just started developing like as we were filming like ideas, like oh, this character is going to do this. Johnny Cage originally was modeled after Daniel Rad from Iron Fist. Later on during filming, we did a little bit of parody to make fun of Jean-Claude Van Damme, but basically his character when I was filming in the first two games was not based off of that. And I know, timeline changes and people who own the game have the right to say whatever they want, who say, oh, he's modeled after Jean-Claude Van Damme, but that wasn't when I was making the game.
And in terms of, you mentioned the development of the individual characters, it sounds to me like it was a very organic process, and this stuff wasn't written out. So, this is Scorpion, this is what he looks like, these are the moves he does, you need to do these moves. It was very much on the fly, and you were building and creating these characters.
Yeah, John was like, okay, I want you to come out and do a fighting stance. And then I was like, well, he's Daniel Rad, he's a movie star, he should be a little cocky. So I come out and wave at the fans. And then John was like, you know what? Come out 3 times, do that, and then change it. So that was basically always like that. Do something 3 times and then change it. So I would do a punch 3 times, and then I'd do it this way 3 times, and this way 3 times, and then I'd cock back and try to just... So the whole process was, it's very slow, and... Awesome. We were in there for days trying to figure out what we were doing.
Sure. And in terms of choosing the other people, as we can see, there's Sonya Blade doing her thing. How much of a hand did you have in helping the company to decide who they should bring in? I mean, were all these guys new?
All my friends who would work for cheap.
So, okay, great. So you knew everybody within the team?
Yeah, everybody in the team, and I talked to him. I spoke with him and said, "Hey, this project won't pay you a lot, but you'll be able to help create, this game because they don't know what they're doing. They're used to not having so much action in the game. So, and the characters were really loose at the time. They were like, okay, you can, everybody. It was like we'd have one idea and we just would build on it. And the lead was John Tobias, and he was more worried about having the best for the game. He wasn't really, like, if he heard an idea, he'd be like, we're going to do that. And if he heard ideas, he'd be like, okay, we're going to do that, and we're going to escalate it. And then also we were friends, so, I'm sorry, I'm harging up all the time. But like an example is like Scorpion. Scorpion, John was like, okay, for Scorpion, I want you to pretend you're blowing flames out of your mouth. And then I looked at John, and I'm just like, I'm not going to do that. And he's like, why not? And I'm like, well, because if I blow flames out, my whole head will be on fire because I didn't remove the mask. And then John's like, don't be an asshole. Remove the mask. And then Rich has been scared of skeletons his whole life. So that's the thing Rich, who's Kano, fears the most, is skeletons. He would close his eyes during movies and not watch skeletons because he's afraid of them. He's like, oh my God, what if you pull your mask off and you're like a skeleton? And then John is like, oh, a flaming skeleton. So that's how a lot of the process started, was like, somebody being a smartass or just somebody having one idea, and then we just steamrolled idea after idea. Like, goofing around. One time we were goofing around and Carlos was doing a particular move, and then Rich jumps out dressed as Kano. He's like, what if there's a secret character where you have to fight two people at once? So right there, all of a sudden, the idea for a secret character came out. You know, to have secrets like characters in the game came just out of that stupid craziness of people goofing around, because we did that, and John's like, come on, guys, we got to get to work. You know, we got to work on this game. We can't be goofing around. So, but that idea stepped, like, you know, later on we would use it. We would film two more characters, and then we would use that to film to come up with Reptile.
Okay. And Warren, to bring you back in, at what point did you start to have a hand in this endeavor?
Well, honestly, I really had nothing to do with the game. That was really Ed Boon and John Tobias. They were the team, and they were working with some artists, John Vogel and a couple of other guys. I really wasn't involved. I was working on T2, but I did start working on W-Target, improving it at some point when I was done with T2. The thing, you know what I want to mention, though, is the costumes. I had nothing to do with them, but I know that John Tobias was telling me that you were scrounging around thrift stores and any place you could, cutting out pieces of cardboard and rubber or plastic, you know, just putting these, what ultimately looked like cool costumes, but they were just sort of hacked together. There was no costume designer from Hollywood.
When we went to buy Scorpion's costume, we bought the kid size, the largest kid size, because it was $10 or $15 less than the adult size equivalent. So it was like, he was just like, he would be like, no, we can't spend money on that. No, and then, you know, like I said, he was like, do you think you guys can fit in this? And I'm like, oh, it's going to be a little tight. And he's like, yeah, but it's $15 less. And so I was like, well, you know, what are you going to do? We'll try it, and we could always just put duct tape on it if it falls apart. So, yeah.
What'd you say, 11.8 billion? Is that what it's worth?
That's right. Yeah.
But in the beginning...
from small acorns.
Yeah. But I do. My involvement in the small way I was involved came a little bit later. Came towards the end of the game. So Ed Boon was programming what we call the attract mode, which is what plays when nobody is playing the game. It's just something that loops. And he wanted to have a full screen image of Goro in the attract mode, and put the title of the game on top of it. Well, a full screen digitized image was a ton of memory, and we didn't have that memory. So he came to me and said, listen, I know you're playing around with compression algorithms, which I was, and he said, is there anything you can do? Tell me if you can do something. So I said, sure, but you have to pay me a royalty. And I was just joking. But I put together a little I compressed the image. I gave him a decompression algorithm he could put in his software. And poof, the image of Goro was in there. And then months later, when Mortal Kombat was out and was a crazy hit, I got a check. I got a bonus check. I barely did anything, but it was not $11.8 billion. I will tell you that. But I was just happy that he remembered. It was very kind.
Good job, Warren. Good job.
Wouldn't happen without you.
Daniel, can you talk a little about one of the things which Mortal Kombat is, of course, most famous for, and those are the spectacular fatalities, which made that game so unique. So was that really just an extension of this crazy cooking pot of creativity that you guys were just kind of going crazy with the ideas until something stuck?
Yeah. Again, John was like, he was just like, we have to figure out a way to at the end of the game, you got to win, but you got to finish the guy, So we need a finishing move, and that's what we called fatalities for a long time, were the finishing moves. We just he was just like, okay, so how would you finish a guy? And then that's when I was like, I'm going to jump up in the air, and I'm going to put my fist through his skull. And then that was too graphic. And then I was like, well, how about if when it gets to a certain point, the guy drops to his knees, and then I forget martial arts and I just brutalize him. Just blah, 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 and then he would fall over dead. So we filmed that, but we never used it. And then he was like, you got anything else? Because everything was in 3. I had to think of 3 things. And so finally, I remember during the 60s that there was a guy called Matsuyama from Japan. and he would fight bulls like hand in hand. The bull would come out, and he would fight, like beat a bull up, kill a bull, which you can't do now. But he would kill a bull with his bare hands, you know. And one of the moves was he would take his hand and chop off the horn after the bull was dead. I mean, the guy is crazy, and he used to punch boulders, so his hands were like all deformed and that. But I was like, oh, that would be cool if I would just punch some guy's head off, you know, kind of in that.
That would be cool.
Yeah, well, and John was like, okay, let's film that. And so we filmed it, and that became the first Fatality.
Okay.
And then after that, everybody, because we used to compete in martial art, everybody tried to one up. So I punched the head off, and then Rich DeVizio was the next, Kano was the next one to be filmed, and he wanted to take out your heart and eat it. So if you really look closely at the game, you'll see him put it by his mouth before he raises it up. But they never told you that he was taking a bite of your heart. So then that became pretty gruesome, and then it continued.
How quaint. That's right. I suppose we should address the elephant in the room, and that's one of the what was perceived at the time to be the graphic, violent nature of the game. What's your take on that, Dan? I mean, at the time, did you see it as well? This is just we're just having fun with the game, or actually were you conscious that you guys were potentially pushing the envelope and therefore attracting the quarters of a teenage audience, perhaps?
Well, one thing when we were making the game that we were, when we were doing the game, when they asked me to do the game, they promised me that we were only going to do 200 arcade cabinets, because when we were negotiating, I was like 201 because I'm going to get a cabinet. And then John and Ed were like, no, we're only making 200. You're not getting a cabinet. They cost like $4,000 or $5,000. You're not get a cabinet. Get it out of your head. And then I was like, are you sure? If you give me a cabinet, you can make as many as you want. And so they were like, no, I promised you we were only going to get 200. So that later on became one other thing. But so. And then when we were doing this, we really designed it for like the arcade. Like when you go to arcade, it's different than now. When you go to arcade, you have to kind of have your own quarters. You have to be an age where your parents allow you to go in this arcade with other strangers. So it was really, people go to arcade 13, 14, 15 years old, so they have their own, they're kind of mature to a level. Not that you're mature at that age, but they know that this is entertainment. So with the blood, John wanted it like an old samurai movie. He really loved those movies. He wanted it, if you remember the old samurai movies, you cut your arm off, blood's all over, squirting for hours. So he wanted it like that. So we never thought that it would like ever get home or be this big of a hit.
Right. Tell me to mind my own business. But so what did you guys get in terms of compensation for being a part of the development of Mortal Kombat 1? Was it a flat fee, or was it?
Yeah, we got an hourly for hourly fee for being models, but I think that's the whole thing is like because it was 200 games, and they let us help create it, which they should probably have not have done, because then in reality the intellectual property is not completely. Because we didn't really work for, Midway. It could be kind of weirdish.
Okay. But presumably no residuals of any.
No residuals.
For the original.
Well, just a promise, because again, when just sorry to lag on. When I mentioned to him, hey, you guys are making more games, he promised me you weren't going to make more games. They kept on saying, okay, we're going to get a bonus. When it's going home, you're going to get a bonus. And in the end, when finally, the owner of the game sent me a letter and said, do you have everything in writing that John and Ed promised to? Do you have that in writing? And I was like, no, I don't have it in writing.
Right.
That's the end of that.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Ron? Sorry.
No, I was going to say that there's a similarity in the acting world. I'm also an actor, and sometimes actors go into auditions and are asked to improvise. like for a commercial, and then they find the stuff they said in their improvisation in the commercial, even though they weren't hired. So there's a real gray area where sometimes people are used, I guess is a word, to add artistically to a product, but they're not technically on the staff, and it's a gray area. It's an unfortunate thing, yeah.
And so Mortal Kombat 1 comes out. The cabinets are built, presumably more than 200 in the end, Daniel. And then a decision is made that actually the sequel needs to be done, Mortal Kombat 2. Warren, are there differences now in the WTARG system for Mortal Kombat 2? Is there a distinct improvement in the graphic quality?
I've got to be honest with you. I don't remember exactly when. I don't remember the timeline of WTARG. It wasn't anything I thought would be of any historical significance. So between Terminator 2 and Revolution X, I did definitely work on it, and in some major ways. Like we added chroma key. So the new Targa boards had chroma key capability, so I added that to the software. Chroma key, chroma key is when you have a certain shade of blue, it will automatically strip that out of your image. And so we created a blue screen studio, which we did not have for Mortal Kombat 1. I don't remember if we had that for 2 or if 3 was the first one to use it. But at some point we did develop with professional lighting. We had the mats and the lines on the floor, but it was all colored chroma key blue, and we would try to chroma key things out. Although Sal DeVita, one of the artists, I did a panel at the San Diego Comic-Con. It was a year ago or 2 years ago, and John Tobias was there, Sal DeVita, Ed Boon, Mark Trammell, a lot of these guys were there, and Sal was saying that they still, even with the chroma key, they had problems with bleed because it was video. So if they used a videotape, if they ever videotaped something and then tried to strip it out later, they always had to correct for the bleed. It's just that blue would bleed into the image. But yes, it just continued to improve with every iteration of hardware, with every new PC that came out with faster or more memory, with our revs of our own video game hardware, because our own video game hardware was improving, again, as I said, with palettes and things like that. So yeah, I just took advantages, but I don't know the timeline exactly.
And so from a professional perspective, when you were approached for Mortal Kombat 2, were you a little bit more, okay, well, I'm prepared to do it, but this is what I want, and I need it in writing, and was it a bit more structured than the vagueness of
no,
MK1?
actually that conversation happened close to the end of Mortal Kombat 2. What happened was when I started filming with Mortal Kombat, I didn't get check for a while. Like I would film, and then 3 months later, John would say, "Did you get a check?" And I was like, "No, I didn't get a check." So then he'd run to the office, and then he'd like, "By the time you're done today, I'll make sure you have a check." So I was in the habit of them not paying me very promptly. So that's why I just didn't. So during the conversations and stuff like that, John would be, "Don't worry, we're going to sort it all out later," and I understand that things were tried in one way and didn't work out, or however it was, and that's what it is. But that's how it. But again, for Mortal Kombat 2, we were just kind of like, okay, this time we're going to pay you a little bit more hourly, and we got a better camera, and we're going to have a better. We have a studio. They're going to spend some money on lights and stuff like that. So.
So can I just interrupt? Yeah. So the multiply produced bald character that's sitting in the stands, if I remember correctly, that's Bill Dabblestein, who was one of our programmers on Terminator 2.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, they put a bald cap on him, and
he's all of those. He's cloned.
Yeah, he's cloned.
Wow. Cloning.
And so for your part, Daniel, can you remind us of which characters from Mortal Kombat you were?
Yeah, I did.
Because it's more than Johnny Cage, right?
Yeah, Johnny Cage, Scorpion, who later turned into Scorpion and Sub-Zero, and Reptile and Smoke, and Noob Saibot, and that was just, the palette change. We were running out of time. We wanted more characters, but, it took so long because we didn't know what the heck we're doing, that, John was just like, hey, can we film enough for like 5 characters, and we're just going to color swap them? So I just did a bunch of different fighting stances, and then we got together what moves they can have common moves, and then we had like 5 or 6 moves that would make them look individual.
And I'm curious, again, as someone who knows nothing about martial arts, how, aside from the costume changes, how do you make the subtle changes from one character to the next that allows Sub-Zero to clearly be Sub-Zero and for Johnny Cage to clearly be Johnny Cage? Would you have used a different martial art for each, or was it just in the sort of subtlety of the way you
the technique,
you shaped your body?
It would be like different styles, and two, in Chinese martial arts, there's 68 different ways to kick.
Holy cow! All right.
So in sport martial art, it's a lot more limited because you can't always kill somebody. So in the older traditional arts where killing was actually allowed, there's a variety of kicks. So when we're doing stuff, we were kind of like, we would change the kick a little bit, the angle of the kick, or make it, where if you know martial arts, you would technically know like, oh, that's this kick, or that's not the same kick.
Okay. Right.
We were geeky. I used to collect comic books when I was a kid, so I was a geek.
Yeah, but I like the fact that even though you guys were aware of the technical differences between these characters, and I guess you could say, well, Johnny Cage would do this type of kick as opposed to that type of kick, which is more of a Sub-Zero kick, for example. But actually, as an idiot who knows nothing about it, I could walk up to the game and I could see that distinction in the characters. In other words, the distinction between the characters was a lot deeper than just a costume change. There were subtle differences in the way they kicked and the way they moved and their fatality.
Yeah. If you really slow down the first game, you'll see the hand positions especially between Cage, Kano, and Raiden, because those were the first 3 we filmed. You'll really see everything's a little bit different. The elbow is different. Somebody was going to use the fist a little bit different. Or instead of using a fist, they might use a palm. So little differences. Cool. Just throwing it in there.
Yeah. I would imagine putting. How many of you were there, by the way, doing the moves? Was it half a dozen guys altogether? Or?
There was actually myself, my brother Carlos, who's Raiden, Rich Divisio Kano, then I. Originally, we were going to have the guy who did Kung Lao as the ninjas, but he dropped a weight on his foot at the last minute, and so the next day I put on the costume for Scorpion and Sub-Zero, and then there was Liz who did Sonya, and then my friend Hosang who did Liu Kang. So 5.
So I would imagine putting a group of young, very fit people in the same room and locking the door for months on end to get this game out. There were a few amusing moments, I would imagine, and a few stories to tell. Tell me there were, Daniel. Otherwise, this question's going nowhere.
Yeah, there's plenty.
Can you give us one or two? All right, just give us one.
Okay, 1 or 2. There's so many. There's so many. Probably
any injuries?
Okay, well, there's a story with a kind of an injury. So we're shooting Raiden, and we're going to have him. What happens is they want to have him flying across the room. So, So at the beginning, they're going to shoot Carlos bent over, and he's going to lift up one leg and going to kind of look like he's flying. But when I looked at it, I looked at his hips, and I was like, guys, it's going to look like exactly how you're shooting it. He's not flying. He's going to look like his legs are down because his hips are down. So he's not going to do that. So we should get, sorry for babbling. During Cage, I was doing jump kicks, and then John was like, "You're jumping too high because when you jump up, your top of your head goes dark because the light changes in your head. Can you jump lower?" And so I was like, "This is friggin' ridiculous. I can't jump lower." I was like, "Can't I jump and then I'll just sit on, and I looked around the room, and I'll sit on the stairs, and since you're cutting out frames anyway, you can get the jump, and then we'll take some pictures of the jump kick on the box, and you could put those together and do that. So John was like, oh man, that's really good, well, let's do that. So anyway, during this part, I was like, we could do the same thing for Raiden and have him bend over on the box, and he could lift his legs, and his hips would be correct, and he would look like he's flying. And so sorry, this coming to an end soon. And so Carlos is like, okay, I could do that. So he arranges himself on it, and then he's going to lift his legs, and I see him apprehensive. And then when he lifts his legs, he smashes his balls and goes, ah, like that. And so we started making fun of him, going, ah, ah. And so eventually in the game, when he's flying, that came from him smashing his balls.
Wow,
because when he flies, he does that. Whoa!
Yeah.
Even though somebody else did the voice, but the idea came from him smashing his balls. So it was pretty. So whenever I hear that, I start laughing because I was there from, and again, it's how it grew. It came in from that joke moment, and it just grew into all these screams and yells and craziness that was going on.
When you guys all go home and someone says, what did you learn at Free Play Florida? You can recite that story. So I figure we've probably got 10 minutes left, so enough of me babbling on incoherent questions. I wonder if we might go to you guys, and I'm sure you've got questions for either...
I got a question for Warren.
Either Warren or Daniel.
Yeah, please.
Knock yourself out.
So, when you're developing all this stuff, does it really change the I mean, I'm not technical, but inside the game, did it change the chip, or did you find just a way to cheat the chip? Cheap the hardware, because you're coming up with this. You're taking digital stuff, but it's not designed really to do that, right?
Well, the thing is, as we started figuring out how we were using these digital images, I would see things that the artists were doing that they were very clunky and repetitive or very time-consuming. Then I would sort of write a feature to make that job easier for them.
Yeah, because it's growth, like on the spot growth.
Yeah. So like our hardware originally wasn't capable of growing or shrinking an image, but then later versions of the hardware had scaling built in. So made it so rather than have to store different sizes of an image, you just take one image and grow it or shrink it because the hardware was there. So improvements like that gave us more options as software guys, but also in the tool WTARG. I would just try to write features that would make whatever seemed to be the most tedious thing that they were doing, if I could somehow automate that, I would try to automate that.
Yeah, I asked because the growth in between 1 and 2 the time period is not that short for somebody to discover, something to be like, oh, now we're going to get it on the market to do it. So that was pretty much all in-house growing to make it that much better.
Yeah, the software continued to grow. It got to the point, so when we got to Revolution X, and we had Aerosmith in our blue screen studio.
I met them.
Yeah, but Steven Tyler touched me.
I don't know.
I think you can sue for that these days.
I don't mean emotionally. Yeah. So we, by that time, we were able to literally point a video camera at a live subject, no videotape involved, literally, to say go, start recording motion, and then within about, I'd say a minute, we could actually see that animation on our hardware.
That's friggin' amazing.
That's where I wanted to get it to, and we got it there by Revolution X. Yeah.
So if you have a question, please, for Warren or Daniel, please holler.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be about testicles.
Did you ever get your machine after Mortal Kombat 2?
Oh no, I never got a machine.
Should we have a whip
But
round?
thank
Buy
God for that, because I don't know where I would put it in my condo. You know what I mean? Where in the heck would, it's huge.
They're heavy.
Do you have a specific favorite move or fatality? Like of any of your characters, not just Johnny Cage?
Oh, for me, again, sorry.
No, I don't.
Actually, he loves them all, because he actually created them all. But
I didn't create it.
well, you had made the program, so it's kind of, you know what I mean.
Can't take credit.
Humble, but that's
Take it
good. But for me, I'm not humble. I created Sonya's Kiss of Death, and that's my favorite fatality because I was like, oh, Sonya has to do the kiss of death. And then, John was like, okay, so let's take a look at it. And I was like, oh, it's cool. Can you make it into a little butterfly in which it's you blow up? So he was like, oh, I could do that. So that's my favorite fatality is Sonya, but because I made it up.
Yes, Paul, next question.
How do you feel about the movie adaptation of the characters?
I remember, by the way, so we all the guys at Williams, we went, and I call it Williams, even though Williams bought Bally Midway, and they decided to use the Midway logo, but to me, it's still Williams. It was the same company with a name change. Anyway, we all went to see the movie when it came out in Chicago as a group, and I got to say, I was kind of blown away. Of course, I'm not as sensitive to the creation of it as the creators would be, Ed Boon and John Tobias, but man, I thought it was very cool to see all these characters up on a big screen in an actual movie. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I would prefer it to be a little darker because I wanted fatalities in it.
Yeah, I knew that it wasn't going to be true to the game. That I knew going in.
Yes, next question.
Did the game take any inspiration from the movie Big Trouble in Little China?
That's a great question. That's really a question for John Tobias and Ed Boon. There may have been. I have a hard time believing there wasn't some connection there, but yeah, that'd be for them to answer.
Okay, I've got here and here.
It sounds like from what you were saying at Williams, there was a lot of freedom to do what you wanted. Is that the case, or were you doing it like under the radar, or did they? How did it work back then?
I think it's a lot of freedom because everything's development. So when you're developing something, you have to have a little bit of freedom. Otherwise, you won't go into new territory.
Yeah, and honestly, they're not as much freedom as like I had at Gottlieb when I was making Qbert, where basically they were just like, go make a game, we don't care. At Williams, I think management wanted to kind of know what you were doing before they would let you even start down the path. But then I think once they sort of had a sense of what you wanted to do, then they kind of left you alone to do it. And I think with Mortal Kombat, there probably was some conversation about, well, what exactly are you doing here? But yeah, I was not part of those conversations. And like with Terminator 2, I think there was a little bit more, interest because we were dealing with a producing partner who was the movies, and we had to kind of get it right, and so that affects things too.
Yeah, I think because Mortal Kombat was going to be a smaller game. One time when we were first testing it, and the blood was out of control because it was the first character like we were doing Johnny Cage. So it was really, really over the top, and it was kind of like, I looked at it and I was like, John, that's, it looks kind of real. And I was like, can we do this? And he's like, we could do whatever we want. He goes, as long as it's the quarters, they're going to let you do whatever you want.
And Goro was a puppet, was a stop motion, kind of like the original King Kong or something. He
was like 8 inches. He wouldn't stand up by himself. We had to put a pencil in him to stand up.
Was there a move that you did or film, but you couldn't put it in the game either because of management or perhaps a limitation of the capturing that you wish could have been in the product but didn't make it into it?
Yeah, there was like again, John planned on there being 3 fatalities for each. He wanted like, it'd be cool if we could do 3 fatalities each character, and 2, after my brother was like X-ray, we wanted to have everybody have an X-ray move, and that didn't happen. So but it's all growth, It's not like now where the game has 1 or 2 years to come out. They want their game out in like 8 months, right? 8 or 9 months. They want you got to get the quarters fast.
Then
Yeah, it has to come out quickly. So you got to get whatever you can in the allotted time, and whatever you can't, you just can't.
Just final question.
So our last question.
Yeah, real quick question for Warren. What does WTARG stand for?
Well, that is a lovely question. Honestly, the W was for Williams, not Warren. I was not that much of a egocentric person. And TARG stands for the Targa Board, that was the hardware that we used to do the digitizing. Williams Targa board. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's a good trivia question.
And sorry, Warren, finally for me. So was WTARG the first arcade motion capture system developed? I mean, would that be fair to say?
I do not know. I mean, Journey was the first game that used digitized images, but it was just the band's heads in like 4 or 5, 8, maybe 8 shades of gray. So it was not. It was technically digitized, but it was not. What we did. Honestly, I have no idea what was going on in the industry at the time. I was just concentrating on doing what I wanted to do. So, yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much
thank you.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Warren and Daniel. Great sports. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.